Welcome to Reformed Thinking, the place where we take scripture and serious spiritual writing, pull it apart, and put it back together so you walk away truly informed.
Today we're doing a deep dive into Psalm 13.
Yes, Psalm 13 is often called the Howling Psalm, and for good reason. It might be the clearest map we have in the whole Psalter of how a believer moves through, through real anguish.
That's right. We're going to look at its journey, this progression from a state of almost crippling anxiety into this very deliberate act of prayer, and then how it lands in a place of just triumphant faith.
And it's so concise. Just 6 verses, but they break down perfectly.
The structure is incredibly clear. Verses 1 and 2, that's the question of anxiety. Then you get verses 3 and 4, the cry of prayer.
And it all wraps up with 5 and 6, the song of faith.
Exactly. And the sources we're looking at, especially commentators like Spurgeon, they see the psalm as, well, as the vocabulary God gives his people for what they call ever-returning trials.
So it's a blueprint. It's showing you how to feel like God has abandoned you without actually falling into despair.
That's the core of it, how to process that feeling without letting it break your hope.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then, in that downward spiral. Because he starts in a really dark place.
He really does.
The first thing that jumps out in verses 1 and 2 is just the repetition. The question, how long?
Yeah.
Appears 4 times back to back.
Yeah, how long, how long, how long, how long? It's intense, and the sources are clear. This isn't just, a sign of simple impatience.
It's deeper than that.
Oh, much deeper. It signals this intense desire for deliverance, but it's also a warning. That desire is always, always in danger of sliding into a murmuring spirit.
A spirit that starts questioning God's goodness itself.
Precisely. The whole focus becomes the delay, the duration, and that's where the anxiety risks becoming sinful.
One of the sources had a really striking name for this psalm based on that raw emotion. Not just the how long psalm, but the howling psalm.
I love that description because it's so accurate. This isn't polished, polite language you'd use in a formal church service.
No.
It's a howling, a roar of pain. The grief is just so big that it can't find any other way out. The sources say the music of the prayer is gone. It's just the voice of our roaring.
But the critical point here is that God hears that. He's not put off by the rawness.
Not at all. He understands it. He's listening for the desire underneath the noise, the work of the Spirit, not for some beautiful turn of phrase.
And this focus on how long also gets at something else the sources highlight, how suffering just completely warps our sense of time.
Oh, absolutely. It's a key part of the psychological agony. When things are good, in what the sources call the summer days, time just flies, right?
Gone in a flash.
But in the winters of the soul, time doesn't fly. It flutters painfully. It just drags.
The commentators had a great example of this. A week in prison feels longer than a month of freedom.
It's so true. The anguish isn't just about the pain, it's about the duration of the pain. And that's what tests your patience more than just about anything else. It's the waiting that breaks you.
So with that in mind, the psalmist then builds what our sources call the 4 walls of his prison of sorrow. He gives 4 shapes to that how long question.
Right, and this breakdown is so helpful for understanding just how trapped he feels. The questions cover everything: how it feels to him, what he thinks God is doing, what's happening inside his own head, and what's happening out in the world.
So let's take the first one. This is what the sources call the dark thought.
The darkest. The first wall is this idea of perceived forgetfulness. He asks, "How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? Forever?"
Forever. That's the word that just sends a chill down your spine.
It's the ultimate fear for a believer. Not just that God is disciplining you, but that he has literally forgotten you, that this is a permanent abandonment.
Why is that specific fear so destructive?
Because if God, the source of everything, has forgotten you, well, what hope is there? The sources describe that feeling as being in the suburbs of hell.
Wow.
It's the closest a believer can get to feeling the horror of being utterly cast off, of the covenant bond being broken for good. That little phrase, forever, shows his anxiety has just taken over his reason.
Okay, so that's the first wall, this terrible fear of being forgotten. That then leads to the second question, which is a little different.
It's a bit more rational, as the sources say. He pulls back from the edge a little. This is the wall of divine withdrawal. He asks, "How long wilt thou hide thy face from me?"
So he's not saying God has amnesia anymore. He's saying God is intentionally hiding.
Exactly. He recognizes that God is still there, but he's purposefully withholding the light of his countenance, the feeling of his favor.
Which for a child of God is still a terrible experience.
Oh, it's terrible. If your whole life is built on seeking the Father's smile, having that smile deliberately hidden is a profound kind of sorrow. It's a calculated test of faith, and it feels awful.
Then the focus shifts, right? From God to what's happening inside his own mind.
Yes, the third wall is this internal ruminating. How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily?
This is the self-torture part.
It is. The sources call it bitter work. It's your own mind turning on you, just replaying the pain, trying to find an escape, trying to figure out why, and coming up with nothing. Just unavailing devices.
Exhausting.
It is. And it keeps the sorrow in the heart daily because you never stop analyzing it. You never give it over to the physician.
I thought the analogy the sources use here was just perfect. The idea of chewing a bitter pill.
It really is. An affliction is like a pill. It's meant to be swallowed in submission to do its work. But what does he do?
He chews on it.
He chews on it, and it fills his whole mouth, his whole soul, with this raw bitterness that was never meant to be tasted like that. He's basically picking at a wound, mentally.
And then comes the final wall, the external one, the one that often feels like the last straw.
Right, the external humiliation. How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? This is described as the wormwood and the gall.
Two of the most bitter things imaginable.
Exactly. To see the wicked prosper while you suffer, to hear their taunts and their laughter, it just grates horribly on the ears of grief. That public mockery can be the thing that threatens to break your patience completely.
So we have this picture of a person just completely boxed in by sorrow. Let's dig into the theology of that first question, though. The sources label that cry, "Wilt thou forget me?" as an ungracious question.
Yes, and that's not to be cruel to the person suffering. It's a theological diagnosis. The question itself is just. It's structurally unsound. It attacks the very character of God.
In what way?
Well, two main ways. First, it's a denial of God's omniscience. The sources put it very bluntly. Can omniscience fail in memory?
I mean, no. It's a logical contradiction.
It is. To suggest God just forgot is to shrink him down to our level, to make him finite and flawed. It's an insult to his perfection.
And the second error?
The second is even more personal. It maligns Jehovah's heart. It questions his covenant affection. The Bible compares God's love for his people to a mother's for her nursing child and says even if she could forget, he will not.
So to ask if he's forgotten is to question the most basic reality of the covenant relationship.
You're questioning the very tenacity of his eternal love. And from a Reformed viewpoint, this is central. God has, as Scripture says, graven his people upon the palms of his hands.
It's not a distant memory, it's a permanent mark.
A permanent active reminder. So this idea that he could cast his people away forever is just. It's a foolish question born of grief, because it contradicts the very security of his covenant.
Which is why the second question about the hidden face is seen as more rational. It's not about forgetfulness, which is impossible, but about divine discipline, which is very real.
That's the critical distinction. God hiding his face is a sovereign act. It's intentional. And it is absolutely not a sign of a forgetful heart or permanent rejection.
It brings to mind that analogy of the pilot in the cockpit. Well, the passengers in their seat feeling turbulence, the intercom is silent, and they start to panic. They think the pilot has abandoned the cockpit.
Right.
But the silence doesn't mean absence. The pilot is still there, flying the plane, probably navigating the most difficult part of the flight. That's what God is doing when he seems silent.
That is a perfect parallel. The hidden face is an act of love. It's a test to see, as the sources say, what metal they are made of.
To see if you'll trust the pilot even when you can't hear his voice.
Will you depend on the truth of his promises or only on the feeling of his presence? That's the test, and it's essential for spiritual growth.
So this brings us back to the duration of the trial. If the trial is a test, what does a long trial signify? If we keep crying, how long, what does that suggest about us?
This is a really sobering point in the commentaries. They argue that long sorrow seems to argue abounding corruption in the sufferer.
So the length of the trial is directly related to the depth of the impurity that needs to be dealt with.
That's the idea. It forces a very deep self-examination. God isn't just trying to fix your circumstances. He's trying to fix you.
And the image for that is the goldsmith, right?
Yes. Think of gold in a furnace. If the goldsmith leaves it in the fire for a long time, what does that mean?
It means there's a lot of dross, a lot of impurity that needs to be burned away.
Exactly. So the very length of the trial, the fact that you keep asking how long, suggests that the spiritual dross, maybe it's pride, maybe self-reliance, is deep-seated. God isn't doing a quick surface-level polish. He's doing a deep, thorough purification. The long trial is actually a sign of his meticulous care, not his neglect.
And that understanding seems to be what allows for the pivot. This is the moment in the psalm where everything changes, right at verse 3. Stops looking in and starts looking up.
It is the absolute turning point. The sources describe it so well. They say, prayer lifteth up her voice like the watchman who proclaims the daybreak.
The long night is ending.
Yes, the tide is turning. This is where you see that truth, that prayer is the life of hope and the death of despair. He literally stops the bitter work of taking counsel in his own soul and cries out, "Consider and hear me, O Lord my God."
That word consider feels very direct, almost demanding.
It is, but it's a demand based on the covenant. He's not telling God something he doesn't know. He's asking God to apply his known character and promises to his specific situation. He's saying, "You are my God, so please act like it for your own glory."
So prayer isn't just asking for help, it's actually the mechanism of restoration. The sources talk about it as a kind of ventilation.
I find that analogy so helpful. Prayer is the saint's exercise field. Think about physical exercise. It makes you sweat, and that sweat clears out toxins.
A kindly sweat, they call it.
Right. In the same way, the exertion of prayer allows the believer to breathe out the malignity of his disease. You articulate the doubt, the fear, the despair, and in doing so, you expel it. The spiritual fever breaks. You're no longer a passive victim. You're an active participant in your own healing.
And the specific request he makes is, lighten mine eyes. That's the immediate antidote he's asking for.
It is. Because deep sorrow, as the commentaries note, doesn't just hurt your heart. It causes a faintness and dimness of vision. You become spiritually lethargic.
It leads to what they call the sleep of death.
A very dangerous place to be. Spiritual darkness makes the eyelids heavy, and if that sleep continues, you're just one step away from giving up hope completely.
So lighten mine eyes is a prayer for survival. It's a plea to not go under.
It is, but it's also a prayer for perception. Notice, he's not primarily asking for the darkness around him to be removed. He's asking for the eye of faith to be cleared so he can see in the dark.
So he can see God's reality even when he can't feel God's presence.
That's it. It's a prayer for illumination, for spiritual clarity. And this is where that metaphor of the smothered fire comes in.
Right, where sorrow and anxiety are like ashes choking the coals.
And prayer is the bellows. It blows away those ashes and lets the hidden flame of faith catch again. It's about restoring that inner spiritual vitality, even if the external situation hasn't changed one bit.
Once he's on that firmer ground, he immediately makes a strategic argument in his prayer. He basically uses his enemy as leverage.
Yes, this shows a real spiritual maturity kicking in. He shifts the argument away from his own pain and onto God's reputation.
The argument being, if I'm defeated, my enemies will celebrate, and their celebration will dishonor you.
Exactly. They won't just be mocking David, they'll be mocking David's God. So he links his own safety directly to God's glory. And in doing that, he strengthens his own assurance that God will act.
It's a brilliant move. He turns the very thing that was causing him humiliation into the reason for his deliverance.
It forces the enemy to, as one source put it, grind in our mill. You use their own cruel arrogance as an argument in your prayer. It's a God-centered plea, and that's a prayer God is always inclined to hear.
Okay, so that brings us to the final two verses, and the shift in tone is it's breathtaking. The whiplash is so fast, one commentator said it's like the psalm was written by two men of a contrary humor.
It really is that dramatic, and it shows that the prayer of verses 3 and 4 was answered immediately, not with a change in circumstances, but with a change of heart.
The mercy seat, as they say, refreshes the weeper, and he clears his throat for a song.
And this is where we see what faith really is. It lays the cloth for a feast before the food has even arrived. He hasn't seen the victory yet, but he's already celebrating.
Let's talk about that, this idea of joy before victory. It runs so counter to how we normally operate.
It's the very definition of faith in action. He says, "But I have trusted in thy mercy." The verb tense there is key. It's a settled fact. His joy isn't based on a feeling. It's based on the unchanging character of God's mercy.
So he's rejoicing in the salvation he knows is coming, even before it's visible.
Yes, he's triumphing before the victory. It shows the sure confidence that God's promise is as good as the fulfillment itself.
The sources use the image of a shipwrecked mariner.
A powerful image. The storm is still raging, the waves are crashing over the deck, but he is clinging to the mast. He will not let go.
Because he trusts the structural integrity of the ship?
He trusts the mast. And for David, that mast is God's mercy. He is sure of his faith, and his faith makes him sure. The trial didn't crush his faith. It forced him to look only to God's nature for his stability.
So now looking back, what was the point of the delay? If God was never really gone, what was the spiritual gain from all that suffering?
The delay was absolutely purposeful. The sources say that God's temporary departures are designed to gather great mercies.
Like a spiritual winter.
Exactly. The land looks dead, but it's not. It's a fallow season, gathering sap and resources for a much better crop later on. We often do our most important growing in the dark.
And the experience of the darkness makes the light that much brighter when it returns.
It does. The calm after the storm is so much more peaceful because you remember the tempest. Sorrows remembered sweeten present joy. The peace he feels now is so intense precisely because the misery he felt before was so deep.
And this is where he realizes that even when he was accusing God of neglect, God was actually dealing kindly with him the whole time.
Yes. And that brings us to the final verse, which is this incredible, joyful retraction of his initial complaint.
It brings everything full circle.
Completely. The man who started by screaming, "How long wilt thou forget me?" ends by declaring with total certainty, "He hath dealt bountifully with me."
It's like a plaintiff in a courtroom suddenly dropping the case and publicly praising the defendant.
That's a perfect way to put it. He realizes that while he was mourning, God was working. He was being brought out of his own black nature and secured in the covenant. The bounty wasn't just deliverance. It was the faith that got him through the darkness. The bounty was the preservation of his soul.
So wrapping this all up, what does this deep dive into Psalm 13 mean for you, listening right now? It really gives us a theological map for our own pain, doesn't it?
It does. It shows the path from that self-torture of taking counsel in your own soul, all the way to the clear sight of faith. And the engine that moves you along that path is that active, ventilating cry of prayer.
The psalm makes the anguish feel legitimate, but it also gives a very clear escape route.
A clear escape route. And it reminds us that the biggest problem in our trials usually isn't God's absence, because he's never absent. It's our own obscured spiritual vision.
Caused by looking inward for too long.
Exactly. The solution is to stop looking at the problem and to pray that simple, direct prayer. Lighten mine eyes. The crisis breaks when you shift your focus from the length of your pain to the certainty of God's covenant love.
And here's a final thought for you to take away from these commentaries. If long sorrow seems to argue abounding corruption that needs to be consumed, then what specific spiritual dross might the persistence of your how long be designed to burn away? What does the duration of your current trial teach you about the specific careful work God is doing in your heart right now?
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.